Good morning and welcome to day 2 of the Power of Us virtual conference. I'm Rachel Riley and I'll be your host this morning as we share another 3 great sessions exploring how we can work together to create a future that we all want to live in. The Power of Us is a culmination of a year-long partnership between Legal & General and Telegraph Spark, the commercial content department of the Daily Telegraph, and has explored how businesses, communities and individuals can collaborate to find solutions to some of our biggest challenges. Between now and midday, we'll have 3 topics up for discussion with 10 brains with passion, experience and expertise to put their thoughts up for debate. First up, we're asking how we can engage in business for good. At 10:45, we'll be rethinking retirement and how our senior citizens can live their best lives. Then at 11:20, we'll finish the morning debating how we can create an inclusive entrepreneurial economy. After each session, we'll have a short comfort break to grab yourself a refreshment and get ready for the next topic. And as we are live, we would love for you to send in any questions that you'd like to pose to any of our great lineup of presenters. So please submit them as they come to mind in the window on screen. And please also do get involved in any virtual polling I might poke you towards, where your collective participation will add to the conversation. Before we get going today, allow me to again introduce the CEO of Legal & General, Nigel Wilson, for a couple of words.
Welcome to day 2 of the Power of Us conference. COVID is naturally front of mind for everyone here. One lesson of previous pandemics is that they accelerate pre-existing trends and raise the bar for how we tackle big underlying issues. The best use of technology and data is one example, so is tackling health inequality. So is skills and training, as we see a shift in size of business sectors and adaptation to new work practices. The biggest one is climate. We have had a harsh lesson about what can happen if we get on the wrong side of nature. This has been the most serious blow to the UK's economic performance since the Second World War. So we need a 1942 moment. That was the year of El Alamein and Stalingrad, but also of the 3 Bs, the Beveridge Report, Bevan's early thinking about the NHS, and Butler's Education Act. In the same way, we need to be preparing for what happens after the pandemic. This time, we can be the 4th B, business. Business for good, productive finance, business that collaborates, innovates and disrupts in the interest of the customer and the employee, and business that prospers as a consequence. I'm very grateful to all who have presented and spoken up so far. You have really demonstrated the power of us, and I look forward to another terrific set of contributions, specifically actionable contributions today.
Nice positive start there. Thank you, Nigel, and to all the team at Legal & General. And thank you, of course, to all of you for joining us, either again or for the first time this morning. Yesterday, we heard from Swedish futurologist Magnus, who encouraged us to be more of a loser and allow our ideas to have sex with each other in our efforts to future better. And today's keynote promises reasons for positivity and room for innovation in a completely different yet equally enthralling way. Our speaker today is a business futurist, innovation strategist and world-leading and pioneering thinker of the 4th Industrial Revolution concept. To prepare us perfectly for delving into the topic of business for good, allow me to introduce Charlie Ang.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm Charlie Ang, Global Futurist. Today I'll be speaking about a very important topic of the future of business and society in the 4th Industrial Revolution. I'll also be making the case that doing well and doing good need not be mutually exclusive, and as we move forward will be increasingly converging. So doing well and doing good is the same thing. So first I want to set the context for my speech today, and I want to touch on 2 major themes. The first is climate crisis, and I wrote about this article, How the World Wars of 21st Century May Begin. The World Wars of 20th century are world wars within humanity, And I believe that the world wars of 21st century will be between humanity and Mother Nature. I feel that the COVID-19 crisis is actually the start of this First World War. And if we are not careful, it will lead to further conflicts with Mother Nature. Obviously, we want to avert that. So what are the learnings we have from the past? Because if we don't learn from the mistakes, we are bound to repeat it. So in the 20th century, the First World War, we were not able to reform and restructure our international order after the First World War. So we had a futile and eventually, failed effort to reform the international world system. We created a League of Nations where many countries are not even part of. And because of that, we are not able to prevent the second major conflict of the 20th century. After the Second World War, we learned our mistake. We reorganized ourselves, reformed our global international rule-based order, and built friendships and structures between different countries, how they work with one another, and we added how countries should do business and trade with one another. And with that, it led us to 70 plus years of peace, progress, and prosperity. So the lesson here is that if we do not take COVID-19 as the wake-up call, then we are bound to go into larger environmental crises in the future. The second point I want to mention is the fourth industrial revolution. This is a term defined by World Economic Forum in 2016, and it's referring to an explosion of deep science, deep tech, and intelligence that will enable us to transform our global systems of production and consumption. So this adoption pace will be slowly and suddenly, what I call exponential, and it's happening and becoming evident in the next few years, and it will disrupt all industries and entire production chains, and it will touch all our life, 7 billion over people. It will affect us, hopefully, and I believe in a positive way. So with that, let's look forward into the current challenges and how we can overcome these challenges. So this line is the population growth. Obviously, it's not really a straight line, but for simplicity, let's take that as the population growth keeps increasing until a certain point. We are not sure when then you start to turn. But these 7+ billion people today, and later on 8 or 9 billion people, we are not satisfied. We always want to improve our quality of life. That means that the expectation, there's an expectation gap because these 7 billion people want to live better quality of life. People in the emerging countries want to live like people in the developing countries, and people in the developing countries want to live like people in high-income countries. So there's a lot that we have to match up with. And you can see the red line is that the environmental footprint of serving these 7 billion consumers in the marketplace. Obviously, that's not sustainable. It keeps going up until we are able to force it to turn. So if we use today's state of art, and I'm referring to our business model, economic system, today's prevailing technologies, and our international trading mechanisms, the only way we are able to decarbonize and improve the environment is actually to reduce the amount of production and consumption that happens, which means that we will effectively lower the quality of life for these 7 billion plus people, which again is also not sustainable. It will lead to global social unrest. But what if we are able to delink growth and the environmental costs? What if we can uplift, even exceed people's expectations, and at the same time reduce the environmental footprint by leveraging on the next generation technologies? And that's what I'm going to talk about later. But that is aspiration. I believe we are on that on the trajectory to de-link growth from the environmental costs. So this systemic shift requires all the actors, all hands on deck, the consumers, the businesses, governments, innovators, inventors, technologies, entrepreneurs, all to be part of this very active and creative movement. So I believe that this creating and elevating the quality of life of people while able to reduce the cost, this will be the biggest source of value and wealth creation in the 21st century. So why is that possible? Because as any technology, when it goes into being digitized, when it is using the latest deep technology, keep advancing using research, science and development, we will see an exponential drop in the cost of production. So we can be referring to lab-grown meat. We can, look at energy costs, whether it's storage or solar energy per unit cost. We can look at DNA sequencing, communications technology, computing power, storage space. They are all dropping exponentially. So if we are able to descale costs, something magical happens. So costs, I'm not just referring to environmental, but also health, human and financial costs involved in the production and delivery of these goods and services. And for technology, we are going beyond infotech because many of these technology are in the deep science mode or they are going through digitization. Food technology, clean tech, edutech, material science, nanotech, health tech, production tech, and others. So if we are able to descale the cost, then magic happens. The inverse happens in terms of adoption. We will see, and history has shown, that we will always have exponential adoption of new technology when the cost drops exponentially. So again, touching all aspects of our life in terms of energy, finance, mobility, transport, food, health, education, entertainment, travel experiences, housing, well-being. We'll see the adoption not in millions, but literally in billions. So we descale cost, we scale goodness. So I'm an ambassador of Singularity University, the Singapore chapter, and we were formed more than 10 years ago because we believe in the potential of the next generation of technologies to positively impact 1 billion people or more. So we believe that technologies that goes through this digitization cycle will have this 6 Ds effect. In fact, the whole world, every industry is going through this massive digital transformation. So the first step is that when you convert atoms into bits and bytes, you'll start to see a deceptive behavior. You will see adoption slowly, and at some stage it hits a tipping point and it becomes suddenly. So that is when the technology goes through the roof in terms of adoption, and it disrupts industries. It dematerializes what used to be atoms to be bytes, bits and bytes. For example, all the content we used to produce, print, all the learning used to be physical. Now it's all bits and bytes. It's dematerialized and it's made accessible to many people because there are so-called zero marginal cost of production. And that makes it accessible, sometimes even free for millions of people. So, for example, today you can learn many topics from the courses out there in the internet, literally for free. So, at Singularity University, we have tons of literature around this. For example, the 2 books by co-founder Peter Diamandis on abundance, how we are moving from scarcity to a world of abundance because of this exponential improving technologies. And the world is moving faster and better than we think. And how entrepreneurs, scientists, innovators, organizations should take advantage of this to do good and do well at the same time. So they need a bold mindset, a potentially very fast scaling companies deploying all these technologies around the world. And another kind of organization, what we call exponential organizations, similarly to write and organize themselves around a massively transformative purpose, like Singularity University's motto, positively impact 1 billion people, is a massively transformative purpose, and that's the reason why we exist. Similarly, many companies in future will have a similar kind of massively transformative purpose, and as a positive side effect, they will make money as well. So it's the intersection of these 3 circles that we want to play in. First, to scale goodness by descaling costs, by leveraging on technology. And it's this intersection whereby there is explosive value creation. And the business of the future, the new higher and higher and higher value companies in the future, they'll all be playing at this intersection because they are able to contribute to the biggest value and wealth creation in the 21st century. So there are a few levels of doing good, and the base level is companies that are so-called apathetic business. It's a neutral sum. They let other people do good. They let the government, the society, community do good, whereas they are kind of neutral. But we want to do much better than that. This is the default level. Most companies are here today. The next level is what I call negative sum companies. They generate a lot of value, a lot of profits from one part of their business, and then they pass it on back to community, back to society through corporate social responsibility and impact initiatives. So they transfer and shift the value over through their philanthropic activities. Not necessarily with money, sometimes can be contributing their talent and their management skills. So again, we want to elevate to the next level, what I call zero-sum type of companies, or so-called responsible businesses. There's a net neutral effect to doing good, which means that when they do good, they don't incur extra costs because they build in the social and impact objective into their business. So sometimes it can be engaging the community in the production process, disadvantaged people, using cleaner materials, sustainable sourcing, using renewable energy to drive their business. So this type of business is what I call a zero because it's a kind of net, there's no loss. Yet at the same time, I would say that this kind of business we will see more and more, and I'll illustrate how technologies will kind of shift the companies up. And the archetype of this company is Body Shop. I'm using Body Shop because we're mostly familiar with this brand. They have a sustainable sourcing, organic, natural ingredients, humane testing, and this is built into their business model from day one. And because of that, they are able to also brand themselves as a responsible, conscious, socially conscious business, and able to shift conventional consumers and convert them into conscious consumers and kind of doing business with them. So there's also the plus side. And over time, we'll see more and more consumers making the shift to conscious consumption. At an even higher level is what I call a force for good businesses. So doing good is good for business. And there's a positive sum because it's an end, because there's many levels they can scale this and benefit from this. So these are businesses that see that the future is happening, but it's not coming fast enough. And they want to bring that future positive good and do it today and make it happen in the present. So Singularity University, for example, is a kind of force for good business. But the archetype of this will be a Tesla, a 17-year-old company, and today is the most valuable automotive company in the world. So we are not just talking about potentially in future there will be these kind of companies, but today we are seeing the emergence of force for good companies. Another example is this company called Next Era. So they are the most valuable energy company in America right now. So yeah, they are valued higher than oil and gas, fossil fuel companies. So this is here and now, but we'll see a proliferation of this kind of companies. And I see that in future, the most valuable companies are all playing at this intersection and having this positive sum mindset. So a rising tide lifts all boats. So the fourth industrial revolution, the transformations, the technology, the trends will enable businesses to level up and contribute more to society by doing good. So doing good and doing well is no longer a trade-off, but in future, more and more a reinforcing factors. So I hope to leave you with a positive note that the fourth industrial revolution will address or help us make the necessary systemic transformation so that we address climate crisis on one end and on the other end, the social development goals. But not just for people at the base of the pyramid, but people, the 7 billion people on the whole pyramid. So with that, I'd like to wrap up my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and later I'll be delighted to continue this discussion in the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Certainly an optimistic outlook for the topic up for discussion today, which is, are making a profit and are making a difference mutually exclusive? And what are the lessons that we can learn from COVID-19 in regards to good businesses? Well, our panel today, first we're joined by our keynote speaker, Charlie Ang, live now from Singapore. Welcome, Charlie. Also joining us is the former Chief Medical Officer of England and the leader of the Trinity Challenge, which is a coalition of members united by the common aim of better protecting the world against health emergencies using data-driven research and analytics. That's Dame Sally Davies. Hi, Dame Sally. And last but not least, we have on our virtual studio panel this morning, it's John Elkington, the founder of Volans, a company whose remit is to help businesses drive positive change. So thank you also for joining us, John. And just a reminder, if you have any questions for our panellists, please do submit them on the right-hand side of your screens, and we'll endeavour to answer them time allowing. Well, now, in various forms of a second lockdown across the UK, we've seen many businesses having to adapt quickly to survive. COVID has forced companies to reevaluate every process of their operations and make some incredibly tough decisions. Is acting for good a high priority for business right now, or is survival the aim of the day? Or is being a good business something that consumers value so highly it makes economically as well as morally worthwhile to do good? And what exactly is a good business in this sense? Quite broad questions to open with. We've heard Charlie's point of view. It's very optimistic, very positive. John, what are your opinions? We have there we go. Oh, is that John?
Yes, it should be.
Oh, fantastic. Your audio is working now. Please continue.
I've been turned on. So very quickly, I love Charlie's presentation. I'm a firm believer that we're in a period where a macroeconomic and geopolitical era is ending. It's really sort of since the Second World War that we've sort of inhabited this reality. It's changing very rapidly indeed. I don't think it will transform overnight. I think this is probably 12 to 15 years before we really properly get back on our feet. So I think business is absolutely crucial in all of this. I think most businesses still at best think incrementally, and we've really got to encourage and help them to think increasingly exponentially. But the one thing that worries me, and Charlie didn't bring it up in his presentation, but every time we have these new technologies coming through, and now we have a raft of them coming at the same time, and all of them digital, unintended consequences spray out every which way. And I've gone around Silicon Valley over many years now, and I've continuously asked people whether they know the story of Tom Midgley Jr., who was the guy who gave us the stratospheric ozone hole. He gave us leaded gasoline. He was a brilliant chemical engineer, but he screwed up royally. And I think I would love to see Singularity University and some of these other agents of change thinking a little bit more about the unintended consequences and how we might ward or head some of those off. But finally, I think business is crucial. Business is waking up. Charlie mentioned The Body Shop, lovely company. But actually, I really encourage people to look at the 14-minute video that the CEO of Walmart, the world's biggest retailing company, did about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and where he talks about, he commits Walmart to become a regenerative company, not just responsible, not just resilient, but regenerative. I think that's the wave of the future, but we've got a big gap to bridge between where most companies are and where Walmart is hoping to get to.
Charlie, you were nodding along for most of that. Would you agree with the comments that John made?
Well, I started my presentation by speaking about the World War II. So I firmly believe that we are at some kind of inflection point. And the reason why I mentioned World War II is because that was the two World Wars was the last inflection point. And now we are faced with the next. I fully subscribe to John's view on the unintended effects. Largely because I see that when there's a technology revolution, it will lead to a political, economic, and social revolution. And the two World Wars was a result, and in between there's a Great Depression. And in my view, the whole 30 years period was a result of the technological revolution, and our mindset was still very primitive, pro-modern. Our institutions were still backward. Business was still agricultural phase. So we need to positively reinvent ourselves as a society, as businesses, even governments have to reinvent themselves. Otherwise, if we are not able to make this peaceful evolution, I'm afraid by 2030 and beyond, we'll be faced with painful revolution. So I'm not all that optimistic, but what I'm saying is that technology is in a way giving us a lifeline, but we need to grab it and at the same time do the necessary systemic re-engineering so that we can kind of have the upside and yet manage the downside.
And you mentioned that obviously huge global events just change the landscape dramatically. And Dame Sally, you're working on looking at what would happen. I mean, pandemics, they're predictable, aren't they? We didn't know when it was going to happen, but we knew it was going to happen. Have you noticed, do you think people are changing the way they recognise key workers now? We didn't particularly think about who they were before. Are consumers going to be demanding more ethical companies and different ways of working to protect workers? And are they more conscious of every little thing that's going on now?
So I think companies do good at many levels. They start by doing good by providing employment, as long as it's decent quality, not 0 hours, and that they're properly looked after. They can do good within their community. They can do good with the products that they produce, they sell, and we have many examples of that. Then, of course, they can do good with their profits and how they use those, whether directly or through philanthropy. But to pick up on the other issue you're bringing up, that of pandemics, and this I absolutely agree with Charlie, who was inspirational, is a pivotal moment. We knew we would get more pandemics. In this century, we've had a pandemic or a very nasty outbreak every 5 years. And so it is important that we prepare and that we think, what does this mean? And I think one of the big stories coming out of this is highlighting inequalities and the impact on individuals of that, but also the impact on society. And what we're doing through the Trinity Challenge is saying, what do we have now that we could use so we would be better prepared for another pandemic? And it goes to the heart of what both Charlie and John are talking about. It's data. And you can't prepare effectively going forwards now without accepting that we need not just health data, but we need data about social issues, economic data, mobility data, adherence to mandates data, all of that. So with Legal & General as a founding partner, for which I thank them, we've brought together a great coalition of people working on just this, the Trinity Challenge. Companies that are allowing people to use their depersonalized data, academics asking questions, all working together. And we've launched a public challenge. So anyone who's interested in trying to make this a better world through data and better preparation, look at the website, thetrinitychallenge.org. Join in.
Are you finding that businesses are contributing just out of philanthropy, out of wanting to do something good? I mean, presumably people don't know that they're, going the extra mile and they're not going to be making financial gain specifically out of your work.
We have a mixture. We have some of the data-rich companies like Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Tencent, Legal & General in this country, Discovery in South Africa, bringing data and brains, I have to say. They have great data architects and they look at things differently. If you think about some of the things that Legal & General are doing in their advanced care research and their longevity tables, this is really important, and it shows different ways of looking at things. So it brings people together, but others are donating money because they believe this is important to be done, not only for the end in sight, better prepared for another pandemic, whether it's the finding that it's happening, or it's the response or the but that it is also changing how we practice health and public health, moving it into the data science world. And I can see Charlie nodding. I mean, public health has not embraced data science yet in the way we have to. And our collaboration and challenge is changing that across the world.
And going back to John and your specific mention of Walmart, what is it that drives companies like Walmart to make such a broad statement? Is it consumers? Is it publicity? Is it going to is their business dying out if they don't make these more ethical choices?
I think it's a combination of factors, and one of the factors is the generational shift. I worked with business for 40 years now. When I first approached companies, you couldn't get in through the front gate, let alone through the front door. Now it's routine to just go straight into the boardroom, deal with director level people. So that generational shift, I think, is immensely important. But there are all sorts of other things happening as well. And one of them is companies recognize that talent, younger people now, this is their future. They want any organization that they're engaging with to be dealing sensibly and in a timely way with these sorts of agenda items. And they're also acutely aware that more and more of the problems that we face, put aside a moment the solutions, are themselves exponential. They're wicked problems. They're things that almost seem to resist solutions. So you think about obesity, chronic disease, and diabetes. You think about plastics in the ocean. You think about things over our head like space debris. You think about the climate emergency, the biodiversity emergency. All of these things are getting substantially worse on our watch. So, and I think one of the things that worries me about business, and I work with some of the leading businesses in the world, is that they still think incrementally. They still think that if they do a little bit more, do things a little bit better, they get a bit more of their, the value that they're creating out to the wider world. That will be enough. It will not be enough. The incumbents are stuck in a mindset which I think is deadly dangerous, because in the next 10 to 15 years, and Charlie was referencing it, we're going to see enormous disruption of one sector after another. And the problem is millions of people are going to lose their jobs in that process. And at the moment, we don't have either business leaders or political leaders willing to stand up and really address some of these problems in an insightful, strategic, and effective way. And that's what we need to see.
So more government leadership, is that what you're suggesting? Or more business leadership? Or is it going to be consumer driven?
Consumers come in every so often. I did a book in 1988. It sold 1 million copies. It was called The Green Consumer Guide. And for a period of about 4 or 5 years, ordinary consumers were really interested in the environment, in health and things like that. And you could get them to drive change in business. But for much of the time, most of us don't want to think about all of that stuff. We just want to, price, quality, availability, all of that sort of stuff. I think politicians and I think governments are fundamentally important now. And for about 50 years, thanks to Milton Friedman and his ilk, we've squeezed governments down out of the picture. In a way, we need them back. But we don't just need government as usual. We actually need dramatically more effective government. And you're beginning to see some of that developing, but not yet fast enough, I think.
And you mentioned ubiquity, cost, availability there. We've got a question in from Ben. I'll ask Charlie. What do you believe is the best way to get consumers to shift from buying from ethical companies when there's often a cheaper alternative out there?
I believe in a few years' time. I just to bring things into context. We are not into fourth industrial revolution yet. We are on the verge, and it's just, in my view, by 2025, we will be witnessing the kind of takeoff of the fourth industrial revolution, enabled by technologies like 5G, backbone infrastructure. So today we have to make the trade-off, and my belief is that because of exponential drop in the cost, again, environmental, financial, human cost of production, we'll see an inverse adoption of these technologies and incorporated into our product. I just want to kind of illustrate the shift that we went through in the original industrial revolution. It was from manual scarcity, and when we went through the 2 cycles of industrial revolution, we had manufactured abundance. And the most successful companies, they ride on that, trajectory for the next 100 years. General Motors, General Electric, Ford, Standard Oil, up to now. So we are seeing the same as we go into the fourth industrial revolution, what I call dirty scarcity into clean abundance. Clean energy, and clean also includes being healthy. And we are not consuming food that is that new chemical and scientific formulation that make something nice and healthy at the same time. So I believe that more and more it will not be compromised. It will be, as you consume consciously, it's also good for the consumers, also good for their pocket. So I see less of this trade-off as the same trade-off between businesses doing good and doing well, as well as consumers doing good, buying good and buying well.
So moving towards conscious consumerism. I've got a question off the back of that to do with green credentials as well, and obviously not just the pandemic recently, but we've seen kind of the explosion in talking about diversity and companies keen to back ad campaigns promoting Black and Asian minority ethnic communities off the back of George Floyd's murder in America, of course. So the question is where's it gone? The question was about tokenism. So how do we know that companies aren't just paying lip service to these causes and they're actually making a difference rather than just saying they're making a difference? I'll start with Dame Sally. I know, John, you raised your eyebrows there, so I might ask you if you have an opinion after.
I think there are 2 things. Looking in, and we need to see that they have diversity at every level. Have they got diversity on their boards? I've been very interested, of course, in the feminism of boards. Are there enough women? Because what the research shows is when you get 3 or more women on a board, they function differently and often much better long-term decisions. And I think that's an example of why diversity more broadly from across society will help companies think through what they're doing and make the right decisions going forwards. But I'd also like, and I think it's been brought up already, more young. One of the things that worries me in many ways has been the movement of intergenerational transfer. I mean, whether you're talking about, as we said, the debris in the in space, or the plastics, or I'm interested in antibiotics and antibiotic resistance. These are intergenerational transfers that my generation have used. So how do we bring in the young to to give social purpose, but also think, how can their generation make this a good one for them and their children?
Yeah, excellent points. And John, I think we've just got a short time if you'd like to make your final comments on how do we know companies aren't just playing lip service to the causes they claim to care about?
Well, many of them will be. It's human nature to pretend to be doing something that you know you're going to have to do before you're actually able to do it. And I think this is one of the things that investigative reporting and NGOs and so on play a very important role in understanding and spotlighting. And I think business itself, business leaders, have a role to play. Traditionally, they do not talk about what their competitors are doing, however bad it is. And I think business leaders have to step up, and they have to be heard, and they have to say what's going wrong and how it might be properly tackled. I just want to underscore Dame Sally's point about intergenerational equity and transfers. I think it's absolutely fundamental, that agenda. But for heaven's sake, let's not dump this whole agenda or series of agendas into the laps of the young. Let's help them, prepare them, support them, fund them to do what they're going to have to do, and let's work with them as they do that. We can't simply have the baby boomers retire and say, we tried, we were environmentalists. Well, no, they weren't, most of them. We really need to help younger people do what they're going to have to do. And I think it could be the most exciting period for about 100 years in terms of developing new solutions and creating new industries.
Yeah, a lot of nodding in agreement there. And I think if anyone tuned in yesterday and saw 13-year-old Emerson Sutton, young advisor to the Mayor of Lewisham, they would agree that youth has certainly got value and can definitely make an input into solving some of these problems. So thank you very much. I think that's all we have time for on this section of the chat. But thank you very much, Charlie, John and Dame Sally. As I say, that does conclude our first chat with three quite different perspectives, but a lot of agreement on the question of whether making a profit and making a difference are mutually exclusive. Thank you to our panellists. We'll wave them goodbye as we'll take a 5-minute break before we're joined by our next lively bunch on the topic of rethinking retirement. See you in a few.